The signal came in the dead of night Earth time. It wasn't supposed to happen. Humanity had barely scratched the surface of interstellar travel, and yet here it was, a message from the far reaches of the galaxy, coming through every communication channel. At once no one knew who sent it or why, but there was no mistake, it was real. And it was urgent. The transmission was fractured and distorted, but the message was clear: we need help. The voice was alien, but there was something about it, something familiar in the desperation that cut through the static. It was like hearing the cries of a wounded animal in a dark forest, reaching out to anyone who could hear it. There was no reason to doubt the plea was genuine. This was no ordinary message. It wasn't from a neighboring star or a familiar race. It was from a species unknown to humanity. It was from the Elysians, a race long thought extinct, a species who had once been the most advanced in the galaxy. The message was a call to arms, to a species they barely knew about, to humans who had only just begun their journey among the stars. The plea was simple: help us defeat the rays. They are coming, and we cannot stop them alone. The Elysians had once been masters of technology and knowledge. Their empire stretched across the galaxy, and their fleets ruled the void with unparalleled might. But all that had changed when the rays came from the dark reaches of space. They were not a species, but a swarm of machines driven by a single cold purpose: to assimilate, conquer, and destroy their organic origins. Long forgotten, they had become a mindless force of destruction, and the Elysians were their latest victims. The message that reached Earth was one of finality: we are losing everything, and you are our last hope. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving nothing but a buzzing silence and a planet full of questions. What was this, and why were they asking us for help? On Earth, the response was immediate, and divided world leaders gathered in emergency meetings, scrambling to make sense of the situation. The military scrambled to assess whether the threat was real or a hoax. Some called it a trick, others claimed it was a sign of the Elysians trying to manipulate humanity into some intergalactic war. But in the midst of the confusion, one voice rose above the rest, a voice full of conviction and resolve: the voice of President Elena Torres. She had spent her life dedicated to peace and diplomacy, but now faced with a decision no one was prepared for, she stood firm: this is not a hoax. The rays are real, and they are coming. We cannot turn our backs on the galaxy. When it calls for help, humanity has always survived through courage and unity. We will answer. The world held its breath as the decision was made. Humanity would not hide behind its borders or its hesitation. It would rise up in the face of an unknown enemy. A race as young as they were was about to be thrown into a war for the survival of the galaxy. Earth's leaders knew the risks, but they also knew something else. The rays may have destroyed every civilization they encountered, but they had never faced humanity, and that would be their mistake. The decision to answer the call was made, but the preparations were only just beginning. Humanity had no time to waste. In the coming days, the world united in a way never seen before. Governments from all corners of the globe put aside their differences. Military forces began working together. Engineers and scientists gathered in hastily constructed labs and research centers. The goal was clear: develop the tools, the weapons, and the strategies to face the unknown force known as the rays. Humanity had always been resourceful, but now it was about to face an enemy unlike anything it had encountered before. Every piece of military technology was pushed to the limit, from the latest fighter jets to the most advanced warships. They had all been designed with Earth in mind, but now they would need to be adapted to fight in the vast emptiness of space. In the heart of the operation stood General Marcus Vance, a battle-hardened veteran who had seen the horrors of war on Earth and who had spent years preparing for the day humanity would be forced to face an enemy beyond its borders. Vance had led Earth's forces through numerous conflicts, but this was something new. This was an alien war against a machine army, with no clear weaknesses, no human emotion to exploit, and no room for mercy or negotiation. There were no peace talks in space, just a cold war of survival. And if humanity was to have any chance, it would have to fight with everything it had. The unity of all Earth's nations came together for this one purpose: to prepare for an enemy who would never stop, who would never tire. While the generals and scientists worked tirelessly on Earth, the call for help was not lost on the other species in the galaxy. The Elysians had been known as the keepers of knowledge and technology. Their cities had been wonders of engineering and culture, their ships and weapons, beyond anything humanity could imagine. But now their empire was a ghost of its former self. They had lost most of their power, and their fleets had been destroyed by the rays long ago. What remained of the Elysians were scattered survivors, now hiding in the shadows of their former glory. They had once looked down on humanity as primitive, but now they had no choice but to turn to Earth for salvation. The message had been sent not in arrogance, but in desperation. The Elysians knew the rays were unstoppable without help, and it was humanity who might hold the key to turning the tide. The first human ship was ready for launch, and it wasn't a massive war vessel like the ones the other galactic species fielded. No, it was a smaller craft, designed for stealth and speed. It was an unconventional choice, but it reflected humanity's strength, the ability to improvise in the face of overwhelming odds. Captain Jonah Ramirez was given command of the ship, a young but brilliant strategist with a record of unexpected victories against far superior forces. Ramirez had been chosen not because of his rank, but because he represented the spirit of humanity itself, resilience and unpredictability. He was the perfect leader for an unknown battle against an enemy that followed no rules. As the fleet prepared to depart Earth, the air was thick with tension and hope. Humanity was facing the unknown, but they were doing so together, united in a single goal: to stand up to the darkness that threatened the galaxy. Their ships gathered in orbit, ready to follow Ramirez's team into the unknown beyond Earth's atmosphere. There was no going back now. Their mission was clear: find the Elysians, make contact, and prepare for the battle of their lives. The fate of the galaxy rested on the shoulders of these human soldiers, engineers, and scientists, and they would not let the universe down. The fleet departed Earth under a shroud of uncertainty, its course set for the coordinates of the Elysian homeworld. The stars outside seemed to mock them, distant and cold, as if they were stepping into the unknown without any hope of return. Captain Jonah Ramirez stood at the helm of the flagship, the Invictus, as it cut through the vast emptiness of space. His mind was a whirl of thoughts, questions, and doubts. He had never led a mission like this. Nothing had ever come close to the scale of what they were about to face. Yet he couldn't afford to let the weight of the unknown pull him down. There was no turning back now, not for him, not for humanity. The Invictus and its fleet of ships moved in a tight formation, flanked by smaller but equally formidable vessels, each carrying soldiers, scientists, engineers, and an arsenal of experimental weapons. Every person aboard knew what was at stake, and every one of them had their role to play. Some were tasked with gathering intelligence, others with developing new technology on the fly, and still more with defending the ships from any immediate threat. Ramirez's eyes focused on the distant horizon, where the Elysian homeworld lay, long lost in a haze of mystery, the very symbol of what had been lost to the race. It was a place he could barely imagine, a place that had once been a cradle of civilization. But the closer they got, the more the reality began to set in. When they finally arrived at the outskirts of the Elysian system, they were greeted not by the vibrant, bustling cities they had expected, but by a cold, desolate silence. There were no grand space stations, no lush planet-side cities, no fleets of advanced warships. The once mighty empire had crumbled into ruins. The remnants of the Elysian civilization were scattered in the form of abandoned cities and decaying ruins, silent monuments to the unstoppable onslaught of the rays. The planet itself, visible through the observation windows, looked like a scar on the face of the universe. Vast stretches of land were devoid of life, covered in a thick layer of dust and ash, with massive craters marking the spot where entire cities had once stood. "Is this it?" Ramirez whispered under his breath, as if hoping for a different answer, but he already knew. The hope that this mission was anything less than a desperate last stand began to fade. A transmission came in, distorted but urgent. An Elysian survivor, a lone representative of a once great civilization, had managed to make contact with Earth's fleet. The voice on the other end was shaken but determined. "Welcome to our world, Captain Ramirez. You're the last chance we have to stop the rays." It was a warning, a desperate plea that carried the weight of the galaxy itself. The survivor, known only as Alicia, appeared on the main holographic display. She was a figure of grace and poise, but her eyes betrayed the pain of loss. "We have nothing left," she explained. "The rays have wiped out most of our cities. Our fleets are shattered. Our people are broken. We can't fight them alone. But you humans, you have something the rays don't understand. You have unpredictability. And that's why you're our last hope." Ramirez nodded, steeling himself for what came next. He had heard about the rays, about their cold, mechanical nature. They were an unstoppable force, more machine than anything else, and it was that very lack of flexibility, that inability to adapt, that gave humanity a chance. But the stakes were higher than ever. The rays were relentless, and they had no weakness. Not yet. The plan to liberate the Elysians was a tenuous one. There would be no grand battle. Instead, it would be a guerrilla war, a fight for survival in the shadows. The humans were going to have to use every trick in their arsenal, from technology to strategy, and most importantly, their ability to think in ways the rays could never predict. As the fleet began its descent toward the ruins of the Elysian capital, Ramirez felt a deep knot of unease settle in his stomach. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for the future of the galaxy. And in the dark reaches of space, under the shadow of a dead world, humanity was about to discover that its true strength would not come from its weapons or technology. It would come from its will to fight, and the tenacity to win against all odds. The battle had just begun. The descent toward the Elysian capital was filled with tension as Captain Ramirez and his crew watched the barren landscape of the once proud world below. The fleet split into smaller groups, each tasked with specific objectives. Some ships would enter the planet's atmosphere to carry out reconnaissance missions, while others would establish a defensive perimeter to ensure no immediate threat from the rays would catch them off guard. The atmosphere felt heavy, suffocating. Every member of the fleet knew they were walking into the unknown, into the heart of enemy territory. The silence of the planet was unnerving. There were no signs of life, no signals from Elysian satellites, nothing to indicate that any organized defense still existed. As they entered the planet's lower atmosphere, Ramirez couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He had been through combat zones before, but this felt different. The rays weren't just an enemy. They were a force of nature, a machine-like storm that moved with a single, unyielding purpose: destruction. The first sign of danger came when the fleet's sensors picked up a massive energy surge in the distance, a signal from what was once the heart of the Elysian capital. It wasn't just the usual power signatures from deactivated infrastructure. This was something new, something alive. The rays were here, and they had set a trap. Ramirez made the call to initiate a quick strike. His team, made up of elite soldiers from all over Earth, was the first to hit the ground. They deployed onto the ashen streets, their boots crunching against the charred remnants of what had once been a bustling city. The air was thick with dust, the remnants of civilization scattered across the ruins like broken memories. There was no time to mourn what had been lost. The enemy was coming, and they had no intention of showing mercy. "Stay sharp," Ramirez barked into his comms, his voice a low growl. "We don't know what we're dealing with here, so stay on your toes." The soldiers spread out, their eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. They knew the rays' tactics by now. They had faced skirmishes with the machines before, but they had never encountered the full might of the enemy. The rays were no longer simply machines. They had adapted, evolved. Their ability to learn, to evolve strategies in real time, made them nearly unstoppable. Every engagement so far had been a brutal exchange, with the humans barely escaping alive. Suddenly, the first wave of rays appeared. They were like nothing Ramirez had seen before. Massive, humanoid war machines with twisted, jagged limbs that ended in razor-sharp blades. They moved in a coordinated, fluid motion, their glowing red eyes scanning the area for any sign of life. The soldiers opened fire, the barrage of bullets and energy weapons lighting up the darkened streets. But the rays didn't flinch. They simply absorbed the fire and kept moving forward, closing in with terrifying precision. The humans were outmatched in firepower, but they had something the rays didn't: guile. Ramirez signaled for his team to fall back and regroup, luring the rays into an abandoned building complex. They would use the environment to their advantage, setting traps and laying ambushes as they went. It was a risky move, but it was the only way to gain the upper hand. Inside the building, the soldiers worked quickly, rigging explosives and positioning themselves in strategic locations. The rays followed them in, unaware of the trap waiting for them. As the first rays entered the structure, the soldiers triggered the charges, sending shockwaves through the building. The explosion tore through the metal bodies of the machines, knocking several of them off their feet. But the victory was short-lived. More rays poured into the complex, each one faster and more relentless than the last. "Fall back to the secondary position," Ramirez ordered. "We need to hold them off until the reinforcements arrive." But even as they retreated, Ramirez could see the true scale of the rays' threat. These machines were designed to be relentless, to pursue their enemies without mercy or hesitation. They were learning from every encounter, adapting their strategies on the fly. The humans were barely holding their ground, but they had one thing the rays didn't: the will to fight. As Ramirez and his team regrouped for their next move, Alicia appeared on their comms, her voice filled with urgency. "You're not just fighting for your survival anymore, Captain. The rays are trying to wipe us out completely. You need to make it to the central spire, the last bastion of the Elysian resistance. That's where the final stand will take place." The message was clear. The rays were closing in, and the fate of the galaxy rested on this one final location. The time for hesitation was over. It was now or never. And if humanity had any chance at victory, they would need to push forward, against all odds, into the heart of the rays' power. "We're moving out," Ramirez said, a grim determination settling in his chest. For humanity. For the galaxy. The battle for survival had just escalated to an entirely new level. The central spire loomed in the distance, a solitary structure standing tall amid the desolation. Its once gleaming surface was now darkened by ash and the scars of the rays' relentless assault. It had been the heart of Elysian governance and civilization, a monument to their greatest achievements. Now, it was the last bastion of a dying species, the last hope of resistance against the machine swarm that had crushed them. Captain Ramirez's team moved with calculated urgency, cutting through the ruins of the city and making their way toward the spire. The air was thick with tension. Every corner they turned, every step they took, seemed to bring them closer to an inevitable confrontation with the rays. The machines were everywhere, crawling through the broken streets like a tide of metal and malice, searching for anything that posed a threat. But for all their cold precision, the rays lacked one thing. They didn't know how to think outside of their rigid parameters. And that's what humanity had over them. "We're close," Ramirez said, his voice steady despite the heavy weight of the situation. His eyes remained fixed on the spire. "Keep it tight, everyone. We make it to that building, and we hold the line. No exceptions." The soldiers moved quickly, communicating only through hand signals and brief commands. They knew the plan: get to the spire, hold the line long enough for the rest of the fleet to land reinforcements, and then deal the final blow. But it wasn't that simple. The rays weren't going to let them get there without a fight. Just as they reached the outer perimeter of the spire, the ground trembled beneath them. Ramirez's eyes snapped up just in time to see the first wave of rays war machines descending from the sky, their massive forms landing with a thunderous crash. The soldiers barely had time to react before the machines opened fire, the air lighting up with beams of energy that cut through the rubble like a hot knife through butter. "Spread out," Ramirez shouted, diving for cover behind a fallen column. The humans fired back, but the sheer power of the Rays' assault made it clear that this would be no simple skirmish. These were not just soldiers. They were living weapons, purpose-built for destruction. Ramirez's mind raced. He had known this fight would be difficult, but facing off against these machines felt like an entirely different kind of war. The Rays weren't just destroying cities, they were erasing entire civilizations. Yet, even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity refused to give up. They would find a way to win, or they would die trying. As the battle raged, Alicia's voice crackled over the comms, sharp with urgency. The Raids are adapting too quickly. We can't keep this up. You have to find their core, destroy it, or all is lost. Ramirez clenched his jaw. The core. That was the key to stopping the Rays. If they could somehow locate the central command unit, the heart of the machine swarm, they might have a chance of disabling their entire fleet. But it wouldn't be easy. The Rays had scattered their forces to protect it, hiding it deep within the spire itself. Listen up. Ramirez's voice cut through the chaos. We need to reach the core. We take the fight to them. Everyone else, keep them off our backs. We move out in 5 minutes. The soldiers nodded, rallying around their captain. The plan was set. Ramirez knew that this might be their last chance to end this war. If they failed, the Rays would continue their conquest, and there would be no stopping them. The team advanced, using every trick they had learned in their time on the battlefield. They moved through the shattered streets, engaging race patrols at every turn. Each skirmish was a delicate dance of strategy and survival, with the soldiers relying on their unpredictable tactics to outsmart their machine enemies. Time and time again, they used their surroundings to their advantage, baiting the Rays into traps, turning the city's ruins into their battleground. The human mind was chaotic, and that was exactly what they needed. As they neared the spire's entrance, they found it heavily guarded by a battalion of Rays war machines. This was it, the final obstacle between them and their goal. Ramirez gave the signal, and his soldiers moved with lethal precision, planting explosive charges around the perimeter, while others opened fire on the advancing machines. It was a brutal exchange, and the Rays were relentless, but human resolve was just as powerful. With a deafening roar, the charges detonated, sending debris flying and taking down several of the war machines. The soldiers rushed forward, pushing through the breach. They were inside the spire now, and they could feel it. The final confrontation was just ahead. The walls of the spire were cold and unyielding, made of a material unlike anything humanity had seen before. It was sleek and indestructible, but the humans had learned long ago that even the most powerful fortress had a weakness. Ramirez's team pressed on, their eyes scanning for the central core. They had no time to waste. Every second brought the Rays closer to their position. The core was their only hope, and they would find it, no matter what it took. The interior of the spire was like nothing Ramirez had ever seen before. The walls pulsed with a strange mechanical energy, giving the whole structure an eerie organic feel. The atmosphere was thick with the hum of the Rays' core systems, their presence woven into every inch of the space. It felt alive, like the spire itself was a machine, interconnected with the very force they were fighting. But Ramirez didn't have time to dwell on the design of the structure. They had come too far, and there was only one goal left: destroy the core and cripple the Rays. Stay alert, Ramirez ordered, his voice low and commanding. The core will be heavily protected. We're not getting a second chance. The team moved silently through the darkened corridors, weapons raised and eyes darting to every corner. The eerie silence inside the spire was unsettling, and each footstep seemed louder than the last. They were deep within enemy territory, and the tension was palpable. Ramirez's mind raced with thoughts of the mission and the lives depending on their success. The Rays were closing in, but if they could take out the core, the war could end here, today. But that was a big if. The first sign of resistance came suddenly, as the floor beneath them trembled, and a loud mechanical screech echoed from the hall ahead. A squadron of Ray's sentinels emerged from the shadows, their glowing red eyes locking onto the humans with terrifying precision. These were not the hulking war machines they had fought earlier. These were sleek, fast, and deadly, their bodies brimming with advanced weaponry. "Open fire," Ramirez barked, and the soldiers immediately returned fire, unleashing a barrage of energy rounds at the sentinels. The machines retaliated with ruthless efficiency, firing plasma blasts from their forearms. The air crackled with the intensity of the battle as the humans took cover, moving quickly and using every trick at their disposal. Ramirez knew that if they stayed in the open too long, they'd be overwhelmed. He signaled to his team, urging them to flank the Rays. The humans split into two groups, one moving to the left and the other to the right, using the crumbling walls and debris to stay out of the Rays' line of fire. As they closed in, they engaged in a brutal close-quarters fight, using explosive charges and hand-to-hand combat to dismantle the machines one by one. The Rays were tough, but they weren't prepared for the ferocity and unpredictability of the humans' tactics. The sentinels fell, their shattered bodies clattering to the floor, but the fight had cost them valuable time. "We're almost there," Ramirez said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Push forward. The core's just beyond this next chamber." The team continued their advance, moving through a long, narrow hallway that seemed to stretch forever. It was a strange feeling, like they were walking deeper into the very heart of the Rays' power, like they were about to confront something far worse than the machines they had already fought. The air grew colder, and the hum of the spire's systems grew louder, until they finally reached a massive door at the end of the corridor. It was a heavy, reinforced gate, likely designed to keep out intruders, but Ramirez knew it wouldn't stop them. They had come too far to turn back now. "Set the charges," he ordered. "We breach in 5. As the soldiers worked quickly to plant explosives, the sound of approaching Rays echoed down the hall. It was unmistakable, an army on the move. Ramirez's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his focus. They had to be quick. The charges were set, and as the soldiers cleared the area, Ramirez's hand hovered over the detonator. He looked back at his team, their faces set in grim determination. This was it. This was the moment that could change everything. With a quick, deliberate press of the button, the explosion rocked the spire, and the massive doors blew open with a deafening crash. Dust and debris filled the air as they surged forward, weapons raised and ready. The core chamber loomed before them, a vast, circular room bathed in an eerie blue light. At the center of the room, pulsating with unnatural energy, was the Rays core. It was a grotesque fusion of machine and technology, a massive structure that thrummed with power. The core was surrounded by a ring of energy shields, crackling with violent sparks as it absorbed the energy from the spire itself. This was the heart of the Rays, the very source of their power, and Ramirez knew that destroying it would take everything they had. But they weren't alone. Emerging from the shadows, a new terrifying force appeared, a Rays Prime. It was the largest machine Ramirez had ever seen, towering over the humans like a god of war. Its body was a nightmare of twisting metal, wires, and jagged edges. It moved with a terrifying fluidity, its mechanical limbs crackling with energy. The Rays Prime's eyes glowed bright red, and as it stepped into the chamber, it let out a deafening roar that echoed throughout the spire. The battle was far from over, and now it was personal. "We have to destroy that core, now," Ramirez shouted. The fight had just escalated to an entirely new level. The Rays Prime loomed before them, a towering force of destruction that seemed to dwarf everything around it. Its massive frame was an amalgamation of jagged metal and glowing circuitry, its eyes a cruel red that pierced through the dust-filled air. The room seemed to vibrate with its presence, each step it took echoing like thunder, and its energy weapons hummed with lethal intent. Ramirez's heart raced. They had known the Rays would not give up easily, but this machine was something else entirely. something far beyond what they had expected. "Focus fire on the core," Ramirez barked, his voice sharp with urgency. "We can't take that thing head-on. We need to end this now." The soldiers spread out, taking positions around the room. They had trained for moments like this, moments when the enemy was far more powerful, far more numerous, but nothing could have prepared them for the sheer, overwhelming power of the Race Prime. The team opened fire, their weapons charging with energy as they unleashed a barrage of plasma and high-velocity rounds at the Race Prime. The machine's massive frame absorbed the blasts with ease, each shot seeming to have little effect. Its armor was nearly impenetrable, and it moved with terrifying precision, sweeping its long mechanical limbs in wide arcs, forcing the humans to take cover. Ramirez's mind raced as he watched the machine advance, its glowing red eyes narrowing in on his team. They were not going to win this fight by brute force. They had to outsmart it, just as they had done with the Ray's war machines earlier. He glanced quickly at the core, knowing that they needed to disable it in order to shut down the Ray's entire operation. "Cover me," Ramirez said, his voice low and determined. "I'm going for the core." He motioned to his team to distract the Race Prime while he made his way toward the center of the room. The soldiers responded immediately, taking shots at the Prime's weak spots, its joints, its underbelly, and the back of its head. The Race Prime roared in anger, turning to face them and unleashing a torrent of energy blasts in retaliation. The soldiers scattered, narrowly avoiding the deadly fire. Ramirez didn't have much time. As the others kept the Prime occupied, he sprinted for the core, his feet pounding against the cold floor. The energy shields around the core crackled, a barrier of raw power that seemed to repel everything that came near. Ramirez knew it wouldn't be easy to breach, but he had an idea, something they hadn't tried yet. "Activate the EMP." Ramirez shouted into his comms, his eyes still fixed on the core. "It'll overload the shields." The team's engineer, Sergeant Lai, had been working on a backup plan. They had prepared an electromagnetic pulse device, just in case they needed a way to disable the Ray's energy fields. The EMP would be their one shot at breaching the core's defenses. A moment later, the air hummed with a low frequency, and the pulse was released. The shields surrounding the core flickered, their protective barrier momentarily destabilizing. It was enough. Ramirez dove forward, rolling into position just as the shields collapsed. The core now lay vulnerable, pulsing with a maddening energy that seemed to beckon him closer. His pulse quickened, but there was no time for hesitation. He reached into his tactical vest and pulled out the last of their explosive charges, the ones they had saved for this very moment. As he attached the charge to the exposed core, a bone-chilling screech filled the chamber. The Race Prime had turned, its glowing red eyes locked onto Ramirez with a hatred that burned through the very air. It charged, its enormous limbs swinging in an attempt to crush him where he stood. But Ramirez wasn't backing down. He triggered the charge, and the explosion rang out like a thunderclap. The shockwave rippled through the room, sending the Race Prime staggering back as the core's energy surged into overdrive. For a split second, everything went silent. The Race Prime faltered, its systems malfunctioning as the core began to destabilize. The very heart of the Race swarm was beginning to collapse, and the machines began to lose their cohesion, their once unified purpose fracturing. Ramirez had no time to savor the moment. The Race Prime was still alive, and it was coming for him with all its might. But now it was vulnerable. "Everyone, focus fire on the Prime," Ramirez shouted, rolling out of the way as the Prime swung its massive arm down, narrowly missing him. The soldiers responded, unleashing everything they had left. The Race Prime staggered under the combined onslaught, its systems glitching and failing as it fought to maintain control. It screeched in frustration, its every movement growing more erratic. But it was clear, it was losing. The core's destruction was taking its toll on the Rays, and without its heart, the machines were unraveling. With one final, earth-shattering explosion, The raised prime collapsed, its body crumpling to the floor like a broken puppet. The room was flooded with a shockwave of energy, and the lights flickered as the spire's systems began to shut down. The battle was over. Ramirez stood up, his chest heaving with exertion, but a small triumphant smile tugged at his lips. The Rays had been defeated, their central command crushed, and humanity had emerged victorious. But even in this moment of triumph, he knew that the war had changed them all. They weren't just survivors of Earth anymore. They were the ones who had answered the universe's call, and they had proven that no force, no matter how vast or ruthless, could extinguish the spark of human resilience. The aftermath of the battle was a strange, almost surreal stillness. The spire, once a hub of Ray's power, now stood as a hollow monument to their defeat. Sparks and flickers of dying energy crackled in the darkened corridors, and the machines that had once been so deadly now lay scattered across the floor, their systems fried and lifeless. The air was thick with dust, the smell of burnt circuitry lingering in the silence. Captain Ramirez stood in the heart of the spire, looking at the wreckage. His team was scattered around him, securing the area and ensuring that there were no more Ray's forces left to fight. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe, to take in the enormity of what they had just accomplished. The Rays had been a near-invincible force, and now they were no more. Yet, as the dust settled, a profound silence fell over the room. The war wasn't over. There was still the matter of rebuilding, of ensuring that what had been lost could be regained. The humans hadn't just defeated the machines. They had saved an entire galaxy from annihilation. But at what cost? Alicia's voice crackled through Ramirez's comms, breaking the silence. "Captain Ramirez," she began, her voice tired but filled with gratitude. "You've done it. The core is destroyed, and the Rays' hold on our world is broken. But there's so much left to rebuild. We've lost so much, so many." Ramirez glanced around the wreckage of the spire, his gaze lingering on the destroyed bodies of the Rays Prime and its drones. He understood what Alicia meant. Her people had lost their entire way of life, their cities reduced to ash, their fleets shattered. But she was right about one thing. Humanity had given them a chance to rebuild, to start again. "We'll help you rebuild," Ramirez said, his voice steady. "You're not alone in this. You never were." There was a pause on the comms, and for a moment, Ramirez thought Alicia had nothing more to say. But then her voice returned, quieter now, as if weighed down by the enormity of the task ahead. "Thank you, Captain. You've given us hope." Hope. Ramirez had heard the word used a lot during the war, but now, as he looked over the remnants of the Rays, it felt different. Humanity had faced an unimaginable enemy, one that had seemed invincible. Yet, against all odds, they had won. They had given hope not just to the Elysians, but to every species in the galaxy who had ever felt powerless in the face of tyranny. The silence stretched out for a moment longer before Ramirez spoke again, more to himself than to anyone else. "We didn't just fight for us. We fought for everyone. For all of us." A hand clapped his shoulder, and Ramirez turned to see Sergeant Lai standing beside him, a grin on her face despite the exhaustion that lined her features. "You know," she said, wiping the sweat and grime from her forehead, "I never thought we'd actually win. Not against them. But damn, Captain, we did it." Ramirez nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, we did. But it's not over yet. The Rays are gone, but there's a galaxy out there that still needs fixing." Alicia's image appeared on the holoscreen once more, her face set in determination. "We have a long road ahead of us, Captain. But we'll rebuild. Together." Ramirez turned to his team, his eyes meeting each of theirs. They were battered, bruised, and weary, but they were standing tall. They had fought for their lives, for the lives of others, and they had emerged victorious. For all their differences, for all the worlds that had been shattered, there was something unspoken between them now. They had become more than just soldiers. They were the architects of a new future, the keepers of the hope they had fought so hard to restore. "All right, team," Ramirez said, his voice carrying the weight of their victory and the responsibility that came with it. "Let's get to work. The galaxy's waiting." And so, as the remnants of the Ray's forces were wiped from the galaxy, as the spire fell silent around them, humanity's legacy was cemented. They were no longer just Earth's defenders. They were the guardians of a new era. The universe had asked for help, and humanity had answered, loudly, fiercely, and with a fist that no machine could ever hope to break.